So, everyone, I'm Dan Winter, and I'm here with Amadeus. Amadeus, you're something of a healer in England and Leeds, is that right?
I try my best, yeah. I'm in Leeds. I returned to Leeds from Oslo in 2017, although I was just really coaching out there and stuff. But no, I think we're all healers. We just either practicing or not. I'm a practicing healer, and I use Qigong and energy centers such as that. A lot of Tai Chi based stuff, but Qi.
Right. Our friend Susan is very impressed with you. She says you've gone through some serious development with your issue with your eye, and you've really learned about the inner eye.
Yeah, that's very kind of her to speak like that of me. I have some things around vision. I think I've sussed out what consciousness is, and I think the purpose of space is for our consciousness to experience itself. It's like the canvas, the dodecahedronal or amplitude-hedron, whichever quantum physics model of the field you want to subscribe to. But I think where I think is the same I that is Dan Winter. I think we're all one.
That's great. Maybe if you look at your camera, people can see you. See that?
Got you, yeah. It's because the laptop is here. So,
so you're looking at
an external camera, yeah.
I see.
Oh, there we go. We can do it this way. I mean, I won't be able to see. I could put you on top of each other. There we go.
Either way. And you wanted to talk about something about memory through death. Was that it?
Very much so, yeah. I'd like to have that conversation. I think it's not so much about my own experiences. I just think it's time to understand. We're understanding life more and more. We can't really hope to understand death when we don't even understand life properly. Excuse me, this wasn't probably close enough. But I think it's time to take a step towards understanding what the cycle is in terms of life and death. I don't think we understand it properly.
Right. And, we've been working for so long to come up with a bit more electrical understanding in depth. People report feeling this black hole. At the moment of death, you tend to relive your life, which is a compression event. And the ability to survive that compression seems to be electrical, that by getting those memories compressed and imploded, they go from what's called transverse to longitudinal, which is a coherence bubble, not unlike lucid dreaming, that makes your memories not just plasma projectable, but shareable, literally the phase discipline, into that array, which we think is fractal, relating to the collective unconscious, to the actual sacred fractal field grid, the longitudinal array, which is the communion of saints, as it were. So we think we've evolved some understanding around that, involving even, in fact, some of our friends who had a death experience reported the corresponding infrasound that goes with the four geometries seen during a death experience through waveform passes. So we think we understand some pieces of that puzzle.
Yeah, excellent. Let me just press record on this. So it wasn't recording my end. There we go. There'll be plenty to capture. I'm now recording on my side. I nearly forgot. But I remember to plug that in. That's the important part, the on-air light, which I thought would be quite novel.
So you had a specific question about that, if I remember.
I have lots of questions. I have several I can hone in on. Let's start with so my current model of my experience is that it's a strange kind of divine dichotomy in that I think that nothing is true and yet everything is real. All the experience that a perception can have in any vehicle, dog, cat, rabbit, bird, insectoid, amphibian, wherever it is, any perceived consciousness in any vehicle, I think has the experience of anything available to it. I think in the terms of the human conscious experience, I think for me that it's like every blink, every moment. I subscribe something to the Bashar model, where Bashar talks about the person that's starting this conversation now, even this very sentence, isn't the very same person exactly on the fundamental level that's finishing this sentence now. That the I is the you, that this is the universe listening to itself. This is all about you, and you're the only one here. And it's just on every single frame of the film, so to speak, when you blink, when you yawn, in the nanoseconds of the apparent charge of time, we are anything available to everything. And I think that's my model. But in terms of death, when we're done with the experience of this vehicle, if we want to hone in on a question, because question is good. We can have a stream of consciousness conversation, but a question is important. So my question is, what is the best way to die? If we could have an ideal way to die, if we could choose our death, what would we choose in terms of taking as much of ourselves with us as possible without destroying the aura?
No, it's very popular in physics right now to talk about the fact that consciousness is everywhere. And so relating to your previous comment, that, you know, the awareness surrounds you, which I think is true, and agree with that, the sort of the universal hologram model. But also, I think if we understand the physics a little better of how holographic awareness propagates, we see that there's some definite limitations to that model, namely that if you were in the middle of an aluminum box, your awareness isn't going to propagate very well. Whereas if you're in the center of a stone circle in a sacred forest, you know, and there's a huge electrical difference. So sometimes you walk on water, sometimes you take a bridge. So yes, consciousness is everywhere, but, and I think that brings us to your direct question, which is, you know, the best way to die. There's a thought, well, the altar at Machu Picchu,
or what about the sarcophagus in the Coptic pyramid, the Cheops one?
When I laid down in the sarcophagus of the Great Pyramid, the lights went out, and I had a deep, dark night of the soul experience. Actually, it happened.
I happen to know why, but so we're not going to talk about that until you bring that subject up and that identity.
There were some flash memories of the Tutankhamun or the Egyptian lifetime.
Tutankhamun, yeah, he was a cat. I think he was murdered by a priest.
Well, yeah, a bit of a long story, I think, but yeah, you're right. But in Tutankhamun, I think, was the product of the genetic experiment of the Syrians, which was a royal lineage, as it were. But back to your question about death. So when the Tibetans prepare to die, they call it the red line or the green line, and they actually intentionally decide to shrink their aura. And in the end, sometimes you see just fingernails and hair are left. And also when the Great Tibetan dies, you see rainbows, all of which is pretty good indication of the physics of successful compression. And when compression is successful, the inertia is translated from transverse to longitudinal, the coherence bubble that's then propagated into the lucid dream, which is what successful death is, and the ticket into the collective unconscious. So basically, another good metaphor here would be Dave in 2001 saying, there's thousands of those monoliths in here, Dave. And suddenly he's everywhere at once, which is he's discovered what a fractal array is. And the entrance ticket into a fractal array is the discovery that you have stored something so shareable that it serves the collective. So in other words, if you've distilled your memory each night when you go to bed so well that it's distilled to pure principle, then you rest absolutely peacefully, which is precisely the way to successful death.
And that's how you build the unity consciousness that's mentioned in things like Law of One. Everything is recorded. One thing that I'm going to reveal is that everything is recorded. That should be no surprise. Otherwise, to a generation of, if it's not on Facebook or social media or Snapchat or Instagram, it didn't happen. Everything's recorded. You don't need social media. It's all around you. It's organic. You'll get it at the end. Wait till you die. You have it all. Just hang tight.
If you can embed well in the still point. And then that still point indicates also whether you have access to ancestor memory, which has great survival value, as the Aboriginals knew. The real reason for living was the communion of saints, as it were. And that puts a context of a very long wave of memory, which is the physics of soul, as it grows, as the DNA implodes during the presence of bliss. That's why the more you have access to bliss, and that phonon harmonic cascade implodes your DNA recursive braiding, goldenmean.info/DNA manifesto. And that longer wave of embeddability, literally entanglement perfected, called phase conjugation, is the physics of soul, and why access to long memory is a pretty good indication of the presence of ensoulment.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think we need a lot more. I think we need to start using scientific terms, quantum scientific terms. It's always been the most interesting field for me in terms of all the sciences. But I think we need to start coming up with a new lexicon, almost a new scientific lexicon to search into this and to look into the difference in conscious frames, if you like, of each frame being a life. What if down the line, what if one day we understood genetics, we understood the genome, we understood DNA, or we understood the projection of telomerase, or aging backwards, or using a negentropic field, a negative entropic field, to almost reverse the time around cells and kick in the telomerase to work in a different way and extend. What if we could one day, because of the work we do soon, come up with a way to, the second a child is born, say, okay, well, this was this person, this is where they were before. I think one day it'll be digitized. I think it'll be common knowledge one day. I think it'll just be like a big hard drive. Like there was a Netflix show recently, I can't remember what it was called, but there was something like that where you died and uploaded into a stack and you put it somewhere else. Someone will know the name of it. I watched it a few years ago.
Yeah, and yet the concept of perfected array distribution is the ultimate biologic example of maximum memory storage and compression, because it is the perfection of distribution. So one practical application of that, when we can teach the physics of who has a soul, as in who has best immune health, harmonic inclusiveness, who has best access to long memory, and chiefly and critically, who can lucid dream, which means their coherence and longitudinal. Once all of that is taught in electrical engineering regularly, suddenly governments can make decisions based on whether or not our species is losing its soul. Hint, the problem of cloning, the problem of vaccinations, the problem, do vaccinations reduce lucid dreaming? Do vaccinations reduce your aura? All of those things. Suddenly governments can make intelligent decisions based on actual spiritual evolution because it becomes measurable.
It's such a double-edged sword, because as society moves towards machine learning, AI models, and the quantum computing revolution, it's going to be more affordable as we figure out cheaper ways of cooling things, although that's a conundrum in itself. But the idea of, let's say one day we all had access to quantum computers on our phones or just embedded within us, who knows, we could be like the Borg, but we end up with the power to have an artificial, digitized, conscious data bank of all our experiences. Maybe it would come a technological unity consciousness first. We'd all have, Elon Musk wants to put a chip in our brains, wants us to be able to have artificial telepathy. He doesn't know we can have it organically.
But in a way, it seems like that entire conversation is precisely the wrong approach, because AI has evolved and has become the scourge of the galaxy precisely because of that view, when in fact, maximum memory density is where biologic axes of spin can be superposed to a maximum. If I spins inside 7 bits outside, spins outside, which is exactly what DNA braiding to ensoulment is. In other words, genetic material is the ultimate hard disk, the ultimate, because it can implode and become self-aware. So ultimately, if you want to build the ultimate living biologic computer, implode DNA with the most bliss process, would become centripetal enough to steer tornadoes and stars. And all of those other mechanical dreams go out the window as, the wrong side of the track and Borg evolution only. Basically, as we said many times, the idea of the ghost in the machine is a fundamental mistake, because in fact, there can never be a silicon array that could implode and become self-aware with living plasma like DNA in the presence of bliss. So the thing that computers should be for is creating bliss for humans who implode their DNA, and not the other way around. That's what losing our soul problem is.
Yeah, that's quite aligned with what I have heard myself. I'm going to say heard. at this stage. I'm not ready for that conversation, but I think that's nailed it really in essence, because our genetics are the ultimate data storage.
That's right.
The way it's written, we are literally the information, the polyphase split, the chain. We get the 50-50, we get the mother, we get the father side, the mitochondrial, the patrilineal, we get all those base pair nucleotides just binding and doing all that thing, and suddenly we're a fractal of our parents, aren't we? We're inward fractal going within.
Yes.
Or going without. Either way, it's forever. It's both directions.
And in fact, that's why people are they're dreaming of this super information dense quantum computer. When if you look at the physics says that the media within which the maximum number of axes of spin symmetry can be superposed, which clearly is DNA, the braid of the braid within the braid imploding. That is the physics of the ultimate quantum computer, literally the biology of bliss. And all other attempts to imitate that inside some machine somewhere is unfortunately the path of the Borg, because that is a path which doesn't follow the actual biological destiny of maximum evolution, which is literally the evolution of the aura. So all of these people that are dreaming of making the ultimate computer seems to have missed the point that the ultimate computer is actually the biology of bliss. There's nothing that can even come close.
Biology of bliss. Where do you see the next main, and well, let me rephrase, where do you see the most important area to look in terms of advancing ourselves most efficiently?
Well, I mean, I've been teaching about the extraterrestrial history for many years now, and I believe that there are many advanced races here to help us, but there's also many parasitic races here to try to draw on the DNA library. And the DNA library of Earth has some pieces of the puzzle in it for how races can get a soul, because so many races lost their soul. So I think that what humans need to do right now is wake up and look at the tens of thousands of extraterrestrial intelligent races and learn where we fit in. That's how we evolve. And where we fit in is simple. If you can make a child who can have bliss and lucid dream, there is evolution. If all those children are dreaming about is making a faster mental computer, then they're just joining the Borg and down the black drain hole of those who don't know what a soul is. And that problem is galaxy wide. It's not just on this planet. So we're the,
you can look down the street and you see, I saw a lady pushing a pram. The kid must have been no older than, I'd say, 19, 20 months at most, holding a real tablet, like a kid's Android style tablet. It had learned to do this already. That's incredible to me. I just don't think that's the way to stimulate our children, getting them looking at pixels when the world is so incredible.
And Steiner, I think, taught the science of that well, that if children, particularly before the age of about 12, are sitting in front of devices that make images constantly, the children lose the inner muscle required to make an image inside their head, literally IMOG, imagine, the alchemy of IMOG, to imagine. And so when you lose the physics of the inner muscle to make a picture form inside your head, you actually lose access to the real creative mechanics of imploding plasma. And so
in nature, sorry to cut your tongue, I just got to say this while I remember, in nature, if you look around, if you don't use it, you'll lose it. That's how it works.
Exactly. And so there needs to be a trade-off when we realize that, when Luke Skywalker needed to have the Force be with you, the Jedi have to go deep into nature. And that's where the plasma implodes and you get these psychokinetic forces. And the other path is is the path of the Borg. It's the path of Darth Vader. And so that's what Steiner meant by Luciferic versus Ahrimanic. It doesn't mean that we need to be Luddites, but it means that we need to learn to use computers for what they're for, which is to serve the evolution of DNA and not the other way around. That's why we call it the DNA Manifesto.
I like it. Yeah, it's important. I think, look, technology is the one thing that comes along that improves our lives. You know more than anyone. And I think given the new technology that's coming, there's stuff that's in harmony with our organics, and negative entropy literally means returning to harmony. Correct me if I'm wrong. Is that
perfect harmony? That's exactly the word. It's
fair
perfect.
description? I mean, I have the chaos theory tattoo on my wrist. I work with chaos, but chaos implies disorder, but really chaos is only measured from a starting point of distinct variables. What we're really looking at is a system. We're only now realizing it's a system, but we haven't seen the parameters. We haven't seen the edges of that system. We don't know. For all we know, it could be all the black holes in the universe eventually coalesce and get big enough that they suck each other back in again to one point, and the whole thing starts again. That could be like the heartbeat of the universe.
But the physics is actually surprisingly simple. You take the musical key signature of the universe, no one disagrees, it's called Planck length of time, and you multiply by golden ratio, and then you keep doing that. And then you're done, and you've solved all these problems, because the harmonics you get are all the frequencies that make Nick entropy, like hydrogen, radii, DNA, earth grid, zodiac, and all of the bodily harmonics that fabricate bliss and Nick entropy. And literally, then you can teach the physics of bliss process from fundamental first principle of what self-organization is, which is how you get centripetal. And that's what gives you leverage on that universe. That's why it's so important to teach the science of what actual human bliss, charged radiance is, because that's what enables evolution. That's how the aura gets big. And all other paths there, that's why if your ET arrived in heavy metal, they're from the wrong side of the tracks. If they arrived in an intelligent plasma cocoon that came from through the heart of the sun, that means they're worth talking to.
The Merkaba up there must look quite brilliant, I imagine.
Well, as we always say, the plasma universe physicists all agree that angels are real, because they now know that plasma can become self-aware. And if you just take that to its limit condition, the double plasma vortex you call consciousness, you understand how consciousness is formed inside the head, but it can leave the body when you lucid dream and die.
So that's an interesting next discussion then. That brings us nicely to the next part. Since we already fairly certain if we could choose our deaths, I think the majority of people, I think I speak for most of us, I will be bold enough to venture that we would like to die old with white hair, surrounded by our families, the wonderful, typical, perfect, see you later or see you next time. But not a hospital. We have places we go to play sports. We have places where we go to exercise our spirits. Why don't we have a place to go as a ritual to die? At least if we're going to die in a hospital, have a place to go, like for palliative care that's not clinical, something where there's not loads of EMF everywhere, or give me a Faraday cage, that kind of thing.
But there is a very specific electrical engineering to the physics of what is called temple, which is an imploding plasma cocoon, which is plasma projective, which they say was a soul accelerator, what the pyramid is, the immortality effect. But so the physics, the electrical engineering of designing the perfect place to die is literally the perfect place to do embedding. So when Karatkov followed the Kogi to measure the fractality of the air, where they made phone calls to ancestors, he got a clue. The electrical engineering of successful death specifically is the electrical physics of embedding, which is none other than the physics of what sacred space is. We describe 3 ways to measure at goldenmean.info/architecture.
Okay. If we're going to venture and look into not so much consciousness, but the real world, right here, right now, actionable, applicable, grounded action we can take. I'm of the mind that we should be networking, such as the people that would tune into this podcast and that people already follow you. I think we should be networking and stop waiting for other people to do it. I think we are the ones we've been waiting for. I think we're all here. I think I think we came here to do what we're about to do. Wouldn't you agree?
Oh, indeed. And that's part of the process of the more you gain the long memory, ride the long way of Uncle Joe, the more you have that ensoulment, they call it ancestor memory, and the more you can lucid dream and the more you can die. So yes, they call it time travel or time reversal, but it's actually neg entropy. It's literally implosion, which is how you get a big aura.
So just to plug a dear friend of a dear friend. In his last life, he was known as Mr. Casey, Edgar Casey. This life is, of course, Mr. David Wilcock. He has a wonderful book called Awakening from the Dream, which Susan sent to me, actually. I'm about halfway through. It's excellent for an example of lucid dreaming. If someone wants to get started with lucid dreaming, I do wilding myself. That's wake-induced lucid dreaming. I'm not sure if it's the best way. I don't think it's the best way. There's lots of ways to get into gnosis first and then launch into that, and to make sure that your consciousness is staying present without doing the thing called sleeping. But Awakening from the Dream is a great book to read. I think the portals are right here. I think the portals are within us. I think we don't need to go to outer space. I think we can go to inner space. I think it's within.
Right on. And you know, I agree that studying the science of lucid dream induction is richly indicative of the physics of consciousness. For example, one thing I really like about, we were studying the homunculus, the map of the whole body as it exists on the surface of the folds of the brain, because it actually tracks the path of Kundalini. When you feel lightning going up your tailbone, is it all in your head? Yes, and yes, and yes. But the point being that most classic, perhaps lucid dream induction was to look at your hand inside the dream. Now that's actually a very good physics, because the hand
I always wake up if I do that. If I astral project, if I cross my hands or even see my hands, I wake up, I snap back.
Yeah, and it's interesting because you're looking, the hand is the area which has the greatest mapped surface on the folds of the brain, because it's the most energized. So when you look at your hand, you're initiating a do loop. My initials are DEW, but it's actually a do loop, which is an implosion loop. And the reason you wake up inside the dream is that recursion perfected. It's literally the Scorpio it's getting stung by its own tail or cracking the whip. So that's what awareness is that whip cracking. So wake up inside the dream, become self-aware, because literally it's non-destructive self-reentry defined.
Non-destructive self-reentry defined. Yeah. Okay. I'll have to write that one. I'll listen to, I'm going to listen to this myself just at the end of it.
Well, you know, when they took that self-organizing golden mean spiral on the self-organizing torus and animated that to get the origin of Hebrew, my mathematics golden mean.info/DNA ring, and Aleph, Beit, Gimel, Dalet, the letters of Hebrew that form the word Bereshith, the first word of Genesis, which was mistranslated at first, in the beginning. It's actually the sequence of turns to turn inside out on the surface of a torus. And those are the shadows of the letters of the word Bereshith, which was correctly retranslated by Faber-Dolivet and Hebraic Time Historian. At first, in principle, the origin of thingness. And what it is literally the mathematical physics topologically of non-destructive self-reentry, which is turning inside out perfected. Well, why is that the definition of consciousness? Well, it's obvious. The serpent eats its tail perfectly and you implode.
Let's talk about charge for a minute. Have you seen the theoretical work on the discovery discovery of the amplitude hedron? Have you heard of this? It's a geometric shape which seems to be a pixel of sorts. You have a dodecahedral model.
I think it was related to the triconta, and they're all basically, you stellate a tetra and you get cube octa. And if you jitterbug the cube octa, you get dodecaconta. And it's a variation on the theme of the triconta. So it's all a language for talking about how vortex can meet each other perfectly to implode. And when we looked at the physics of photosynthesis, we got the same thing, that only tilt angles of the photon that we name color, which are not tetracubic, are 163 and 117 degrees, which turn out to be dodecahedral face angles. So the physics of color is nesting vortex into a dodeca. So and that became the holy grail, and that became perfect fusion. I just wanted to go back in the conversation a little bit. When you mentioned David Wilcock, my friends thought it was so cute that he always talked about the Blue Sphere Alliance, but didn't actually realize that the the blue spheres are the Andromedans. Hello, they're blue. That's my family. and and uh, and um, and it was the Andromedans who provided the shelter for the Pleiadians, who caused so much trouble, of course. But interestingly, some people would say that so Wilcock didn't realize his own Andromedan roots. That's
no, I don't think he did, and I think that's the beauty of it. And he discovered it at the same time as we all realized as well, which was quite synchronistic in itself. You know, there are no synchronicities. Synchronicities are just our signs we've placed there already. We created those before we even came here.
And when what's his name, the sleeping prophet Casey kept talking about the fire crystal, Atlantean fire crystal, he called it Toy Stone, that actually was the power device of Thule, Atlantis, which was what we build now in terms of Minkowski frost and phase conjugate pumped implosive crystal. It's literally, quite literally, the
Thule. What you called Atlantis Thule.
Thule, well, is because that was the other name for Tahuti, which is Thoth Hermes. Tahute was Dehude, TWT, which was later called the line of David, because they mispronounced the DVD.
Well,
anyway,
on Mars, you were either Thule or you Tiamat.
Well, and Thule was Enki's side of the family, because that's the other name for Tahuti, which is Hermes. So, and but anyway,
that's the repeat. That's the imprint. The repeat was that not the repeat that happened in Egypt when you had the Ra, one of the many Ra interventions? I know they were at separate times, but are we all thinking now that that we're all on the same team? Because I don't think the polarity is there anymore. I don't think it's a binary thing. I think there's bad and good in every single.
Oh, it wasn't, but it was very parallel to Casey's Ahriman, Luciferic. In that case, it was Amun versus Atun. Amun being Enlil, of course, Yahweh, and Atun being Enki, sun god. And Atun's side of the family was Thoth, who was his life force scientist Tahuti. And the name of the royal family lineage of Egypt, Thothmosis, transliterated literally means sons of Thoth, who was not a myth. That's Osiris, and he had a green face in every statue because Enki looked like a frog.
Osiris, Enki. Yeah. So can we talk about Theraphi, since we're talking about Osiris and the many devices? Do you think?
Speaking of hermetic.
I know that Theraphi.net, if you, I'm sure you're aware of what Theraphi.net is, but the device has now had a new iteration, Quantify. That's the another version of the device. The device that you created, it was you're a team, part of a team that created it. You contributed massively, I know. Do you think that you absolutely invented it from scratch in this life, or do you think you're returning it from memory of having it maybe before? Do you think it's the second time we've seen it, or a repeat time we've seen it here?
Well, you know, it's Paul Harris and myself. And, you know, it was Paul. He was quite good about that. He tripped over those famous carvings on the Egyptian cartouche showing the plasma tubes with a snake running up the center of the plasma tube. And people say, did the Egyptians have light bulbs? No, that's crap. The Egyptians knew how to feed voltage into a plasma tube to create rejuvenation. They called it, I will build a Shem unto the Lord. An altar was mistranslated altar in the Bible. No, they were building rejuvenation physics fields. That's what the Garden of Eden was. And but to answer your question specifically, I discovered golden ratio exponents of Planck, origin of negentropy. And when I was a kid, practically, Christopher Bird came to me and said, translate these Antoine Priory books out of French. You know, I've been at that for a long time. And we knew that Antoine Priory in France had healed thousands of cancers and spent millions of bucks for each gadget he built. But what he didn't know was the principle. And that's why it was not replicable and fundamentally not teachable. But when we studied his frequencies and discovered the majority of his frequencies fit my equation, then we discovered what he did not know was that phase conjugation to negentropy was the principle. He didn't know what phase conjugation was. He didn't even know he needed to use two tubes. So at that point, it was my idea to build the Theraphi, and I provided the equation and the physics. But Paul Harris, who was taught probably one of the best alchemy teachers of the planet, had a lifetime of experience building Brown's gas and high voltage devices. And he built the amplifier to feed the plasma tubes, my frequencies, basically. And he did have experience with noble gases. So Paul had a critical set of skills that certainly I would had a great deal of difficulty proceeding without Paul as my partner. But clearly also it was my idea.
So I know we're not going to make any medical claims here. That's very important. We have something we believe serves on several levels. But I'm obviously in the UK. I'm central UK, Leeds, fairly central to most things. As the Romans said, all roads lead to Leeds. They definitely said that. And if someone was around, yeah, forgive the shameless.
Yeah, lead the way. Lead the way.
Yeah, if someone was around wanting to I have friends with arthritis. I have bust up friends, lots of ex-soldiers, lots of ex jiu-jitsu people with some injuries that require like some stem cells, ideally. You know, my friend Stefan, bless him, he's got this crushed back. What sort of people would you recommend the Therify and Quantify for? Who can it help?
Yeah, as you may know, Therify is over 100 times literally the power density wattage into the plasma than the Quantify. The Quantify, being lower power, then has the advantage that you can modulate it with less mess. And so you can modulate with externals. You can have a lot of fun with it. In general, the Quantify has success, especially for people who are more sensitive, maybe not so heavy, et cetera, and don't have such heavy problems, quote unquote, also. But also if you have a sensitive operator. But Quantify is becoming somewhat known, like Therify, for success in doing action at a distance, remote healing. And we're learning more and more about the physics of that, that if the sender and receiver are on a magnetic line cross point called longitudinal embedding, the same as the physics of Agnihotra, it is the physics of action at distance. So Valerie, even for example, will calculate the sunrise sunset moment of sender versus receiver because you get more longitudinal, et cetera, et cetera. So action at a distance is not a mystery, as Einstein did not understand and called it spooky. So and both devices are used.
Action at distance, yeah.
But basically, the fundamentals of both plasma systems are it is centripetal, and therefore the infrared is measured swelling reduction. It is famous for pain reduction, localized pain, often in just a session or two. Long-term or chronic pain, we can help not everyone, but many, but that takes more sessions, 5 or 10 over a couple of week or two, that kind of thing. It accelerates metabolism and circulation, restores feeling in numbed limbs, just hundreds of things. And it's very simple. Plasma efficient charge distribution is efficient blood and nerve charge distribution. So it's obvious that if you get into circulating plasma, your blood and nerves are going to circulate charge better. It's simple. That's why it's a metabolic accelerator. By the way, we just did an interview today with a lady who lost, I think, been trying to lose weight for years. Suddenly she lost 11 pounds in a week by doing intense therapy sessions. So, it is a metabolic accelerator, that's for sure.
As we're starting to understand this area of science, because really if I didn't know your work, and if I didn't know you, if I hadn't been introduced to your channel and you've been doing various things for a long time, but someone outside, if they're just hearing this for the first time, what's an accessible way to start understanding? Where would they go for information? What's a good place to start to understand the fundamentals of this scientifically, to get some knowledge about it?
Well, if they're interested in Therify specifically, when you scroll down at therify.net, it says instructions and info, and that is a very good place because you have the FAQ there and the manual protocols. It's all there in one link. If you're interested in the science behind it, if you click on the science behind Therify at therify.net also. I mean, my book is also a good place to start, Origin of Biologic Entropy. For people who have a more eclectic learning style, well, you go to our YouTube channel, Dan Winter, youtube.com/Dan Winter Fractal Field. We're approaching 2 million views, and play around. There's 300 some films, and so you have a lot of choices. And For their serious science at fractalfield.com/vacuum energy, fractalfield.com/conjugate perception. And for the brainwave science, it's flowinmind.com. So we have a lot of resources.
Real heart coherence as well.
Yes, thank you. realheartcoherence.com, where you see the history of our studies of heart coherence as well. And it's actually a measure of empathy and tantra.
That's something that since I've been reading about that, I heard you mention it in one of your other videos, and I'm a tantra practitioner. Tantra is nothing to do with sex. Tantra is a path of transcending. But the terms of the yogic union side of things, Shiva and Shakti, I can't imagine how beneficial that would be to hook yourselves up to this thing and get yourselves, in harmony, in coherence. I've got to experience that myself. That's something I want to do.
Well, it's quite simple. All you're doing is measuring when two hearts come into the same musical key signature. It's that simple, and it's simple to do, and it's fun. Actually, it was William Golden, the founder of Yoga Journal at Shangri-La there outside of Los Angeles, who first used my heart coherence tech to teach tantra, actually. But I'm not saying it's necessary to measure heart coherence or that measure when your heart's facing, but it's actually
like tuning a guitar. I feel like it's like tuning the guitar. We're not the lyra, we are the song, but we want to harmonize.
It's the same thing as two lovers learning to breathe together. It's identical, actually. And when two lovers do breathe together, their hearts phase lock. It just happens to be measurable, and it's romantic, and you can feel it. And it's heart rate variability, and heart rate variability in training is similar to EKG coherence training.
That's the experience where the heart draws down oxytocin. Oxytocin is food for the heart. It's the reward, isn't it? But people think that tantra or things like that is all about sex and delaying the peak pleasure and all that business. Actually, the Kundalini launch ignition sequence, if you like, comes from one of the other channels that you would have orgasm, but you would have this other channel that's available that you get through directing that energy, a different path, a different uncoiling of the serpent at the Dendera lights, if you like. But the Kundalini is the launch vehicle for, it's the launch key for the Merkaba. Well, that's the way to get into it, isn't it?
Well, tantra in science is the implosion fusion of the aura, and it can be one person or two. That's clear. In the physics of Kundalini, there is a legitimate path for the sperm up the tailbone, and we know where that goes and how it's delivered in the microwave. And that is all at our new documentary on the physics of Kundalini, goldenmean.info/Kundalini. But it's because the sacrocranial pump frequencies, which are the heart rate variability and breath frequencies, are measurably the snake charmer of the spine liquid pump, which then delivers, and you can measure that in phase at the ventricle liquid horns, which become horny, as it were, when those phonon waves implode in the brain. And clearly then you ignite the pineal, and I have 30 years of experience in that, so we've been on that for a long time.
That's a good thing to be reminded of, that there's so much to explore. I don't even know where to start. When I wake up in the day, what do I want to look at? What do I want to study and learn about today? What do I want to absorb today? It's there's so much. The more I learn about this stuff, and I can blow. My favorite thing is to blow my own mind. I'd rather do that. I think I'd rather blow my mind than anything else. It's just my goal is to be awed, is to seek awe.
And ultimately the awe becomes a form of bliss process, where then you enter the stillness and you feel that lightening up your tailbone, and your aura gets very large, and then you steer stars. And the ability to enter that stillness is actually what learning is about, truly, because that's the size of your aura is a real indicator of evolution.
I used to see auras when I was a kid. I used to see them. I stopped being able to see them when I was about 9 or 10. And then I could just see like layers, but I used to see colors. I remember seeing colors around people, and I just lost the ability to do it. I wonder what that was. I wonder if that was just maybe like some electrical interference or something. That I wonder if had I been left to grow organically, or maybe it was some people think it's the fluoride calcifying our pineal gland. I wonder what would have happened if I was able to maintain that, and if I'd have been able to see that energy, because I really miss it. I miss being able to perceive that. I feel like I should still be able to see it.
In the aura seeing school of Christopher Hill's there outside of San Jose, we taught the soft focus, where you because the depth of field, when it's greater with soft focus, open iris, also is gathering more longer waves. And then also being very still. And if the person is against a black or white background, very still. And gradually you will see that radiance. And most people can begin to see auras under training of the conditions. Obviously, if it were in a, some kind of charged and sacred space versus a metal building, much the better.
Yeah, that's the only way I can still do it. If someone's against the white background, and I tend to hold my breath, and that deprives my brain of oxygen. So the most important stuff goes elsewhere. A lot of it goes to vision, but as vision starts to maintain the lock and it becomes less changing, the brain starts to divert that energy somewhere else when you're holding your breath. You start thinking about other things. But if you use that as a meditative state, some people call this soul gazing if they're looking into each other. Against a white background, that's the only time I can still see that. Sometimes they're big. Sometimes someone's got a really tall elliptical aura. Sometimes people's are very, very close to their shoulder. But yeah.
And you know why during intense bliss or kundalini, it's perfectly fine to stop breathing, is because the only reason you breathe is to make the phase conjugate pump wave. Whereas when your aura is perfectly implosive and still, the reason you don't need to breathe is because the implosive phase conjugation has its own presence and it doesn't need the external pump wave. But it's true that, if you try to hold your breath and you build that kundalini lightning before you're ready, it's very, very dangerous, because it's like trying to die before you're ready, having bliss before you're ready. Because if you're not a shareable wave by that point, it means that you haven't sorted your emotions into what's shareable. In my case, it was about 3 months of solid crying.
Got to touch on something that's a good reminder, actually. So going back to death, the overall subject that I talk to people about, do a lot of counseling. A lot of grief counseling was a big part of my past, and a lot of coaching for confidence and showing up in the world more confidently. People with social anxiety. That's why I'm even thinking about going back into coaching, because of all people emerging post-lockdown, either borderline euphoric to be out. All the extroverts are euphoric to be outside, and all the introverts are just like, oh my God, So, but talking about life and death, going back to death, I think I'd like to touch on this. In terms of doing the thing we call dying, the thing we call the process of dying, is it not pertinent to look at things like reincarnation? Reincarnation seems to me a very logical thing. I don't really have a choice to believe in it myself. That's my experience. But let's say that you're skeptical of things like reincarnation, and you were, my family are very skeptical. Well, not so much a couple of them, but my family generally skeptical. They won't have this conversation. I'm sure there's a lot of people being held back by the limiting self-belief of others. But what's a scientific way we can talk about reincarnation without talking about reincarnation? We mentioned all these longitudinal wave implosion loss business. What's a accessible layman's way we can start talking about it in terms of a quantum and energy sense?
Well, first of all, from a scientific perspective, when you look at the hundreds or thousands of extremely well-documented cases of kids coming back with reincarnation memories, these are well-documented, so no scientist should doubt it's obviously real. It's also true that for most people, they don't bring those memories very successfully. So what's the difference between those who bring the memories and those who don't? Obviously, a coherent birth and a coherent death, which allows the memories. So for example, if the birth canal reaches max pressure at golden ratio, the physics of perfect rebirthing, the implosion that brings memory through birth is the same as the implosion that brings memory through death, which is the compression that brings you into the longitudinal array, which is why every Aboriginal knows that if you don't have ancestral memory to make phone calls to, you don't have a culture. So yes, it is about long-term memory. And yes, we must know the physics of reincarnation, because that's the only way to get the physics of long wave access, which is actually the only definition of how we have a soul as a race.
I live in a town called Morley, near Leeds. The War Memorial, the World War I Memorial here, the first name on it is the name of the person I was before. And my first memories when I was born, my first memories of this life are actually not memories of this life. My first memories are memories of seeing. I don't remember the memories raw anymore, like they were yesterday. Like I can remember, you know, things that happened in the last couple of days. But I mean, now I remember the memories of the memories. It's a bit sketchy, but I remember having the memories that were clearly not from anything I saw around me. They weren't, you know, I was older. There was explosions going on. There was trenches and machine guns and artillery. And I used to wake up from the age of like 2 and 3 years old. And I'd walk into the living room my grandfather was, and I would say, am I here to fight? Granddad, am I here to fight? If you need me to fight, I'll fight. You know, if there's going to be a war. And my granddad would just be like, what are you talking about? Just, you know, there's no war. The war is done. War's in the past. And I was convinced I was brought back to fight. I thought I was here for a war. It was really strange. So I used to keep waking up and bothering this poor man trying to watch his snooker or golf on an evening. And, you know, because I had these memories of what I now know to be World War I. And I'd like to understand that. I'd like to understand. I think we need to really look at that. I think that's a fascinating area of science to look into. It must be scientific.
Well, it's interesting that
genetic memory.
Of many of the hundreds of cases of documented reincarnation memories coming through young people are war memories, probably maybe even the majority of them. And that says something perhaps even tragic about our species. But the physics is also clear that wherever you leave a shadow in space of an intense emotion, which is how ghosts get stuck and how memories from past lives, it's always the peak emotions. And we now know the physics of that glandular implosion of the peak emotion leaves a longitudinal array imprint. So indeed,
it's an astral imprint. A ghost is an astral imprint. A mental elimination hasn't occurred because they've been so energetically invested into their surroundings. There is no white light to move on because everything is hyper dimensional in the singularity of that moment.
But we do know a lot about the physics of ghosts, that the reason they get stuck and where they get stuck and why, and the physics of releasing ghosts, for example, Therify is excellent for that, because they need the implosion that enables them to accelerate into the longitudinal array, and otherwise they're stuck, which is why they use the aura of people that have bliss, for example. So the physics of ghosts, where they go, why they go, they're looking for implosive compression. You know, it's very clear. A ghost cannot survive in an aluminum box, for example. We know the physics of that. We know how long it takes them to leave their body. So it is plasma physics. That's clear. And that's how those memories distribute. And we need to discover the plasma, study the plasma physics of spirits and ghosts in order to understand our own destiny.
I have only one experience in my life of anything I can call ghostly, and it was I think the conduit was the Ouija board. Now the Ouija board's been debunked plenty. I'm a rationalist. I'm a scientist in terms of the way I approach things. So I must rationally look and find the explanation of something to discount in terms. Sorry, am I not close enough to the deductive reasoning? And to me, the Ouija board is basically the ideomotor effect. So we were doing the Ouija board because my friends Lee Weston and Cy Robson had done the Ouija board in a den somewhere in an old warehouse, and Cy had Simon Robson, still my friend on Facebook to this day, had a brick thrown at his head. He felt, so I was like, okay, me and my friend Mark, who's no longer with us recently, he died literally a couple months ago, Mark Buttery. That's a name for you, wonderful guy. Well, we did the Ouija board when I was a kid. We must have been maybe 11 or 12 years old. I'd like to say 89, I think it was, 89 going on to 90. And we did the Ouija board, and no sooner had we done, we got all the thing written out. We had the counts, we had the yes, no, all the stuff handwritten on the back of a Monopoly board, I think it was. And we'd done this thing, and we did the whole, if anything is out there, make yourself known. And woof, we both heard a scraping above us. And as we both looked up, the light bulb was vibrating. It wasn't on. this would be easily explained away if the light bulb was on. Light bulb was not on, it was off, and it was shuddering. There's no seismic activity in West Ardsley, Yorkshire. And then it exploded and fell to the bed in shards. And we've got this conversation, like just on Messenger, just reliving it every so often. We talk about it. Like, do you remember that time, we would talk about it. And that was like, the other thing is, it went really cold in the room. My hair stood on end. It felt really cold suddenly. It's like, now I understand that these things, in order to manifest anything, draw in energy from somewhere, and it tends to be thermal. So that's why you would feel cold. It was like a warning, like, don't mess, don't even talk to me. It was like a warning. We ran out of that room and out of that house. I never went back into that house. We ran out of the house so fast. It was crazy. And we've never done anything like that since. But I wonder if it was just, maybe that was just some ghosts having a prank for fun.
But measuring the presence of ghosts is often done by a cold spot. And you're right, that's what implosion is, that entropy. And it testifies to how much pressure there is in a culture where we do not talk to our ancestors, and how we have schizophrenically then cut ourselves off from our own plasma roots by not having conversations with ancestors. And any Aboriginal will tell you that's insanity. If you're not talking to ancestors, you don't have a culture. And so obviously we need to return to that communication with ancestral memories. And that's very parallel to communicating with nature, spirits, and elementals, because they're all plasma. And until our science realizes how plasma becomes intelligence, we are soulless.
I look forward to being able to have these conversations in person. I mean, it's at least we have this. But are you gonna, when the world reopens and things we start being able to move around everywhere, some people are having the double jab and whatever, so they can travel. Do you think we'll have another symposium in the near future?
Well, we had annual conferences every year for 3-4 years, and they were sold out. We had a certain fun. We're visioning the Jedi school and the Flame and Mind School for kids and see with other eyes. And we have some pretty intense dreams cooking over here, also related to our technology projects, carbon nano and energy and molten nickel thermal battery. So we have a lot of things cooking over here. So yes, that is the dream. To be continued. Thank you.
We should have a meeting on calling on anyone with maybe we should announce something right now, where one day we have a meeting where anyone who's got any reincarnation type stories, or if they have retained anything from any of their previous lives, because really they're not previous lives. For me, I've realized they're not linear. They're all happening now. I can even summon, there's a film out right now called Infinite, terrible action movie, but it's really kind of a wing script to awaken this in people. But the idea is that actually all of it is now. We can access it all now in the thing called now, this golden moment. But I remember Stuart Wilde used to talk about, God's gladiators and summoning things in the moment, but that's more aligned to a simulation. But maybe we could have a symposium for anyone who's got personal reincarnation stories, and we can all have a expose. We can all talk about it, and maybe there can be some science applied to that. Maybe we can find at least some correlations that would be strong evidence.
Well, good. That's a great lucid dream. Let's make that a real dream. I like it. Let's work.
I'd like to realize that. I'd like to make that real for sure. Yeah. So I'll announce it now. Please, if you have any, if you're listening to this later on, and you have yourself an experience, or yourself some kind of story relating to having lived before, or maybe you've seen something that has turned you into a believer of that, please contact me. You can reach me at amadeushelikin@gmail.com. That's just my name. I'll write it, Amadeus Helikin, AMADEUSHELLEQUIN @gmail.com. Contact me and just put the subject soul. So the subject will be soul. Subject of soul, that'd be a good name for a book.
Great. Thank you, Amadeus. Really great.
Maybe write that book, The Science of the Soul. Maybe that should be your next book, Mr. Winter.
I really enjoyed this. I appreciate your questions. Let's talk again soon.
Thanks so much. Yeah, we'll have many conversations. I'm looking forward to them. Thanks for your time, and we'll speak again soon.
Blessings, Amadeus. Take care.
Take care, brother. One love.
Okay, bye-bye.